I don't want to be talking to you. I really don't. I wish I could put on mask and not be here. But I am, because in my heart, in my mind, in my entire being, I know that we are on a path that is frightening. There are people all over the earth that have had experiences similar to mine. And we are all waiting for the right time to stand up in unity, and come forward and speak to the world. And immediately this rush came over me and I thought, oh, this is it. And he said, have you ever worked for the CIA or the FBI? And of course, I'm 22 years old. I don't want to have anything to do with this. I'm thinking, why is this happening to me? So what makes this fascinating is that as a child growing up, my father on numerous occasions had told me a story of him being on the streets of Paris during the war, because of course he's from Europe, and how a man approached him. And what my father said was that they asked him to become part of the psychic army, the Russian psychic army. And he kept saying to me, if they ever come to you, do not go with them. Do you understand? Don't ever go with them, because if you do, they will own you. I was shown an image of being in an underground base, that what took place there was so dark and ugly and horrifying to me that it was difficult for me to deal with. What are you doing here? Why can't you just leave me alone? And then I walked on board the craft. The knowledge is that we're not alone, that we're being watched, that what we're doing is being looked upon by other beings that do have a certain amount of knowledge that we ourselves do not have. I have seen the future through them with their assistance. I believe that because we are being awakened to begin sharing this information with people, that there are great changes that are coming, and that we need to all understand that. Whether it was going to be a meteor hitting the earth, or whether it was going to be war breaking out, or whether it was going to be famine, or there was going to be earth changes that took place, any of these things, that man had the ability to change this timeline of what it was that was going to be coming.
Hi, I'm Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot, and we're here with Miriam Delicado, and she's got a website called alienbluestar.com, and she's got a very interesting story to tell. She's a contactee, and she has a special relationship with the Hopi and the Mayan peoples, as we will see as we go forward. Hi, Miriam. How are you today?
Very well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Carrie.
Absolutely. It's a real pleasure. I've read your book. It's a wonderful book. And why don't you just start at the beginning, whatever feels comfortable, and tell the people your story, and let's go from here.
Okay. To start, it's a very, very big story, and it's difficult for me to be able to convey to people the story of my life, which is what I tried to do a little bit in my book, Blue Star, is give people an overview of many of the things that have happened to me. I've had a very interesting past 20 years of my life, where I've had numerous contacts with extraterrestrials from other places. And often people have asked me where it is that these beings are from, and that's a very big question, so we'll get into that in a little bit. But to give the viewers an overview, my life started out very strange right from the very beginning, and my life was not an ordinary one when I was growing up. I first started to notice that I was different probably when I was about 2 years old. And I actually have memories that could take me all the way back to being a baby, as well as most of my remembering came back to me when I was about 2. So when I was probably about 9 years old, my psychic abilities started to kick in, and numerous strange things started to happen to me. I was having very vivid dreams and all sorts of things along those lines that I really couldn't explain. I used to play this little game when I was a child about watching the people in the car as I was driving past them in a car, and I would try to think of what they were saying or thinking in their heads. And when I did that, it was fascinating to me, some of the things that I would hear them thinking about. But at the same time, I was always scared that they would know that I was, probing into their minds, and I never wanted to get caught doing that. So that's a very, very clear memory for me ever since I was very, very young. It's not something that I do now. It's not something that I do consciously ever at any point, because, of course, I would have to ask someone's permission in order to do that. So right from the very beginning, I was a little bit different. And as my life moved forward, these abilities of mine just became stronger and stronger. And by the time I was a teenager, I was doing all sorts of things. I was having dreams that were prophetic in to use terms that people would understand. I saw a number of visions that actually came true within a very short period of time. And I also had encounters with sort of beings that I wasn't clear with where they were from or what focus they were, where they came from. And it was really unnerving for me growing up, because even though I knew that my father had some sort of abilities as well, I wasn't close enough to him to be able to talk to him about it. And that made my earlier years very difficult, just for that reason alone. Now, my father was an interesting character in my life because he seemed to possess certain abilities as well. And when we were kids, we were always, a little bit nervous around him, thinking that he would always know what we were doing. So when jumping way forward into my life, into the year 1988, which is 20 years ago, it was interesting when I did have this encounter on the highway in northern British Columbia with extraterrestrials. And this was a physical encounter that took place that changed my entire life. But when it happened, it was almost immediate that I knew that my father had had contact. Simply because a number of the things that I was told by these beings, my father used to talk about when we were kids all the time, about how the world would eventually change and how we needed to learn how to survive and what it is that we needed to do, this type of thing. So I always knew that he'd had contact. And
didn't he also work for the, an agency, secret, in intel in some capacity?
Not that I'm aware of.
Well, because you talk about him being approached, and he also warned you about being approached at some point. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And how do you know that unless, you've been approached?
That was a very interesting story that my father used to tell me as a child. It was a fascinating story that always, made me really nervous, and I had no clue as to what he was talking about. So what I need to do is step forward past 1988. It was a couple of years later, and I was working in a little yogurt shop. And this is a really fascinating piece to this puzzle for my life. And even I myself am still to this day made a little bit weary of it. So the year was, a couple of years after 1988, and I was working in this yogurt shop, and I was just having a normal day, or I was trying to. And this man walked past the window of the shop, and he looked directly at me into my eyes. And when he did, he came right in the door, walked right up to me, looked me straight in the eye, and he said, "Do you work for the CIA or the FBI?" And I said, "No, I don't." And immediately this rush came over me, and I thought, "Oh, this is it." And he said, "Have you ever worked for the CIA or the FBI?" And of course, I'm 22 years old. I don't want to have anything to do with this. I'm thinking, why is this happening to me? I said, "No, I haven't." And then he proceeded to tell me, he said, "Have you ever thought about working for the Russians?" And of course I said, "Absolutely not." And he then proceeded to tell me how the Russians had been working with people like myself for a very long time, and that if I joined them, that I would never be alone again, that I would be surrounded with people that were like me. And I said I was not interested. And what he was talking about was a psychic program. And he said that this psychic program had been going on for a very long time. And of course I knew all about this. And I very nicely, politely, with a smile on my face, looked at this man and said that I was not interested. And he kept pushing and saying, do you know how strong you are?" And I smiled at him. I said, "Yes, I do know how strong I am." And he said, "But can you control your abilities?" And I said, "Actually, I can." And then he said that they would still be very much interested in working with me. And I told him that there was no way. I said, "What I would like you to do is go back to the people that sent you here, thank them very much for their interest, and tell them that there's no point in ever coming back because I will never be interested." So what makes this fascinating is that as a child growing up, my father on numerous occasions had told me a story of him being on the streets of Paris during the war, because of course he's from Europe, and how a man approached him. And what my father said was that they asked him to become part of the psychic army, the Russian psychic army. And he kept saying to me, "If they ever come to you, do not go with them. Do you understand? Don't ever go with them, because if you do, they will own you. You can't run and you can't hide because they will find you with their minds." And so of course I was always very frightened by this, and it didn't make any sense to me growing up. But in that moment, as soon as the man walked into the store and said, "Do you work for the CIA or the FBI?" I knew exactly who he was, what he was there to ask me, and I was very adamant that I was not interested. And I'm not interested for anyone to do something along those lines.
Okay, yeah, I remember that story from your book, and I think it's a real bell ringer. I think your father had what, maybe Native American blood in somewhere in there. He's certainly got I don't know, European. What would you say your background is, just in terms of genetics, I guess?
My mother is German, and as far as I know, all the way back, she's German. My father is Yugoslavian, and as far as I know, his family history going far, like way, 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 way back, I believe that there's some interesting blood there. But for me to say anything for certain would not be fair to him or to anyone, because I am not sure. But as far as Native American blood goes, no, I don't believe that there is. But with his bloodline, if there's anyone interested in looking it up, that would be able to go very far back, meaning, you know, even thousands of years, I think that it would be fascinating to see where it led.
Okay. So let's go to your incident in 1988. Is that, and tell a little bit more about that, you know, kind of capsulated, if you will.
In 1988, I was living a very normal, average life as a young adult. I just moved from a small town into the big city in Vancouver, British Columbia. And my friends and I had decided to take a road trip to my hometown. And on the way up, everything was normal. We took the drive and everything was fine. But on the return journey, everything changed. There were four of us, four adults and a young child in the car. And the trip, we were driving for hours. I was sleeping in the back seat of the car. And then it started to get dark out. The people that were driving wanted a break, so they went into the back seat, and I went up into the front in the passenger side with my friend. And right away, these big balls of light that looked like truck lights, actually, that's what we thought that they were for the longest time, came streaming up behind us rather quickly in the car. And as that happened, we were wondering why they were traveling so fast. Now, these particular lights followed us for hours and hours in the darkness, and every time we came up to a car or any kind of house or buildings at all, the lights would fall back and disappear. So after hours of this going on, eventually we went through a town where we thought for sure that we had lost the lights. And as soon as we got to the other side of this town into the forested area, absolute moment, we said, okay, we're clear. There's no way they can catch up with us. And literally in the blink of an eye, there they were, these balls of light that were probably about this big. And they came up behind us and then poof. And at this point, after hours, they had been appearing and disappearing, appearing and disappearing. And in the blink of an eye. So my friend got very, very nervous, as I did. Neither one of us were comfortable with what was happening at all. And the people in the back seat were still sleeping. So all of a sudden I screamed at her and I said, pull over the car right now. It's not you they want, it's me. And I went to grab the steering wheel to pull her over when all of a sudden she just sort of flopped, you know, like a Raggedy Ann doll, and flopped her head over and started pulling over and stopped at the side of the road. And by that time the car filled with light from every direction, and these balls of light were sitting behind the car. So at that point I was the only one conscious at that time. And when I turned from the back of the car to the front, I saw a craft on the road. Now I couldn't make out any detail because it looked almost misty and very, very bright. And these beings that were about 4 feet tall were walking towards me. They were very androgynous, almost childlike in their nature. And they had big round black eyes. They didn't have any oval eyes at all. These were round black eyes. And they were directing me to get out of the car, which I did, and I was very scared. I wasn't terrified though, and that distinction needs to be made. I was not terrified, I was scared. So I got out of the car, they led me down the highway a little bit, and at this point I wasn't even thinking about my friends. I was just wondering where they were taking me. And on this embankment on the left, they led me up the embankment where I saw, when I looked up, a larger craft that had two beings standing in this doorway. And they had blonde hair, and I mean blonde as in snow white hair, and the most brilliant blue Mediterranean water blue eyes that you've ever seen, and quite incredible. And the beings, the short ones, took me to the craft, and when I got to the doorway, I walked on board the craft. But what was interesting was that just prior to all of this happening, I'd had a dream in the back seat of the car. And in this dream that I had, this man and woman told me, they said, "We are coming for you soon. Do not be afraid. We are your friends. We are your family. Do not be afraid." And then when I saw these two tall beings, the moment that I laid eyes on them, I said in my mind, "What are you doing here? Why can't you just leave me alone?" and then I walked on board the craft.
And did you have any memories of what happened on the craft at that point?
From the moment I walked off that craft, I had very clear memories. And I have had those clear memories for 20 years.
Clear memories of what happened on the craft, or just clear memories up to the point you've told us?
Both. Once I was on board the craft, I remember a great deal of what happened to me. I do not by any means remember the full 3 hours. I don't. And I don't know if I ever will or not, because up to this point, I mean, I have not had hypnosis done to recover memories. So that's a very important point for me to make to anyone watching, is that these memories have come from conscious memories. So in other words, I walked onto the craft, I had this encounter. It took me some time, but I did come to realize that it was a total of 3 hours, and it was very clear math that I did to work this out. So there was 3 hours of missing time. And I remember quite a bit of the information that they gave me at that time. There were things that have stayed with me so clearly that even as I'm looking at you, I can still see the images in my mind every time I hear about, you know.
Can you give us an idea what was conveyed to you at that time? And does that have something to do with what you're doing here now, visiting Sedona and Hopi Land, the Four Corners area?
It has everything to do with it. 20 years ago, I was given messages, and these messages and information that I was given was so crystal clear to me that 2 days after I walked off the craft, I had a clear understanding of all of my psychic abilities and where they came from and how I had them and why I had them. I had a great understanding of my father that I've never had before in my life. I knew that he'd had contact. I had a clear understanding that there were many other people in the world that were like myself, and that all of these things were related. And after 2 days, I started writing quite a bit of this down. I did not by any means write it all down, but there were key points that I did put on paper. Now, at the time, even with some of them, I did not understand the full extent of what it was and this information. But it was about the Four Corners area as being, quote, one of the safe lands in what they termed the end times, if these end times came in the form that they were giving warnings about. So they gave me warnings about possible futures in which the planet could potentially have destruction, and the people could potentially have a very difficult time. Now, these warnings were just possibilities, but they were things that they had made very clear to me, crystal clear to me, that humanity had a choice in whether or not we were going to end up on this destructive path or a positive path. So many of these things were told to me 20 years ago, but getting into it a little bit deeper, they also told me a great deal about the Four Corners area in particular. So, of course, I did not, at that time, as I was still trying to process all of this information, truly understand what it was that they were saying. How this particular area was a safe land, and how at this time there were certain people that would gather together in this area. The Four Corners area is a really important area to these beings, and it is because it is one of the center points on the earth where gatherings will take place for many people. And it does not necessarily mean that everyone needs to pack up and leave and go to the Four Corners area because it's a safe land. What it means is that even if an individual travels through the area, they are going to be able to have information coming to them within their own selves in order to assist them and help them to know where it is they need to be on the planet. If there is a great cataclysm that does take place, There are certain areas on the earth that will be in safe zones.